Hi, this is Mike with TFP TV, and by a surprisingly large amount of popular requesting, here I am with a pair of different Lee-Enfields in front of me to look at the differences between them. I am of course talking about the SMLE Mark III Star, the most common of the First World War era rifles, also used during the Second World War of course, and the No.4 Mark I of Second World War era fame. Now, just so that we can all be absolutely sure about what we're talking about, this rifle is an SMLE, short for Short Magazine Lee-Enfield. In the 1920s, the terminology was changed, and this became the rifle No.1. The sub-mark of it, it's a Mark III Star. Okay, it's not a Mark III rifle, it's a No.1 Mark III, or a SMLE Mark III. This is not an SMLE, even though it's short, it's got a magazine, and it's a Lee-Enfield, because by the time this was even trialled, they weren't calling them SMLEs anymore. This is the No.4, and if you're wondering what the 2 and the 3 are, I'll tell you. The 2 is the 22 rimfire conversions of various older patterns to roughly resemble this. The No.3 is the pattern 14 rifle. So actually the prototypes of these were No.1 Mark VIs, and then the trials rifles became No.4 Mark I, and so on and so forth. Numbers actually got up to 9, but that's not for today. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, from a shooter's perspective, what the differences are, and then we're actually going to take a look at what's going on under the bonnet, which is English for bonnet, the bit of a car where you lift up and the motor's inside. I believe Americans call that hood for some reason. So we've got the SMLE on the bottom here, No.4 on the top, and the most obvious change that everyone notices is the sighting. This here is a tangent type U-notch. This here is a 2-position flip. Now, this is the wartime economy 2-position flip that's on a lot of North American production rifles. The Savage one's made in the US, and this particular one is Canadian, long branch. This one you've got a 300/400 yard lower aperture, 1/10 of an inch, which is 300 if you've got the bayonet fixed and 400 if you've not got it fixed, and 600 when flipped up without the bayonet. Now, the original type of aperture sight is a rather more elaborate affair. I don't have one on a No.4 right now, but I've got one on this No.7. Doesn't really matter. So you've got a battle aperture, 2/10 of an inch. There are some slightly smaller ones as well. This is set supposedly, again, for 300 with the bayonet, 400 without the bayonet. I want to actually check this myself one of these days. And then in the flipped up position, we've got a ladder adjustable in 1 minute of angle, so 1 inch per 100 yards clicks. And the problem with these was that there wasn't actually enough capacity to make them. So in the North American factories in particular, they had rifles that were complete that they couldn't actually get out to troops because they didn't have sights for them. So they came up with the much simpler 2-position flip, which for a conscript boomstick is more than adequate. And in fact, I've shot this on a proper target, on electronic targetry at 300 yards, and it actually works fine. You just got to learn how much down you need to hold. Now, moving over to the actions, the principle behind the bolt, it's basically the same. They both run on the same principle. They're rear locking. You've got that little lug there that does all the clever work of primary extraction and forcing the bolt forward. That principle has remained unchanged, as has a 10-round detachable magazine loaded by chargers. But this gets into a bit of sort of manufacturing engineering. The origins of this design are in the manufacturing techniques of the 1880s. So there's a lot more handwork. There's a lot of curves. There's a lot of unnecessary cuts. I mean, this cut here doesn't really need to be made. It's all beautifully curved. We don't need things to be beautifully curved. It just needs to work. Yeah, it's of its era, and the charger bridge here is in fact riveted on because it wasn't in the original 1880s design. That's something that came a lot later, around 1907. Now, if we look at the No.4 in comparison, there's a lot fewer curves. It's a lot flatter. It's a lot more angular. It's a lot chunkier. Now, chunkier is good in general. But what's important is that this takes a lot less machining. You can just swizz a mill down that face, whereas this, with all these curves, you've got nightmare. So this is sort of bringing the manufacturing up into the 1930s. Now, one of the problems with converting these to an aperture back sight is that you've got to modify this bolt head because it's really long and it comes out a long way. They didn't want to raise the front sight, so they had to modify these a lot. And in fact, this runs in a rail on the outside of the receiver. There's a claw that goes over like that. Gets in, and there's a little spring there that retains it. You push it to the back, fold it up, and then you can remove the bolt. Now the solution on the number 4 to get around this is that the rail is now on the inside. So you've got this much more compact bolt head that runs inside the rail with a hook that goes in like that. Much simpler. This is a Mark I star, so it's got the bolt release is just a gap in the rail there. And then that will go under the rear sight. With the Mark I rear sight, you have to actually flip it up. There's a little clearance when it's flipped up. Most of the bolt releases on the non-North American production, some very early Savage production, it's a push button there. And as I said, this has to be flipped up to get the bolt out. Now there's some other interesting bits of manufacturing convenience here. Again, SMLE on there. It's much slimmer in the rest of the stock. This is a much chunkier stock. You're using the same size basic pieces of wood to make these, but by making this chunkier, you can machine it less. It needs less machine time, less personnel time, makes it cheaper. Now while we're back here, as I said, the charger guide is riveted onto the SMLE. It's a sort of retrofit after the fact, whereas it's an integral part of the design of the number 4. And there's just this little cross bit there that that needs to be keyed in and brazed in. So up the front here at the business end, they're quite different. This has a heavy nose cap with a barrel flush with it. One of the ideas being that it's harder to pick up dirt and crap if you fall in the mud or whatever. But the other point is that this works in with this complicated bedding system that they've got in here to try and not have the bayonet affect the point of impact when it's fixed. Here the bayonet hangs off the nose cap, not the barrel. This is much simpler. Instead of a nose cap, we've got a band, we've got bayonet lugs integrally machined with the barrel, and we've got a front sight protector that is screwed on, and there's various types of these. And in fact, this number 7 has one of the pressed wartime expediency ones. I think this one's from Savage, this particular front sight protector, but there's all sorts of variation going on in there. The basic principle of the sights being sat in a dovetail block is the same. Some of these have a screw, some of the number 4s have a screw block. This one does, some don't. And then we've got the bedding system, which again I talked about in an earlier video. So that's it from the outside. Let's take the lids off now and have a look. And just a quick point, I'm not actually going to take the metal completely out of the bedding because I really don't want to awaken the bedding demons who like to live in 100-year-old pieces of timber, and it's sort of one of those no good can come of it episodes. We can see everything we need to see for today just by taking the handguards off, so let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to first of all take the nose cap off here. So we've got this cross screw. Now this screw here is the main one for the nose cap, and there's a ready rate spring under here, which you'll see. I mean, I talked about it in the last video on what to look for when buying an SMLE. I'm going to push that down there, and then that slides off like that, and that is the screw that pushes down on this there. Sling swivel drops off, band's hinged, very 19th century, and then the wood because it's hooked under the rear sight there, it slides off like that. And then we can see the inner band with a screw with a little spring underneath it. So just to get to this stage, I've had to take out 3 screws. And if I wanted to take it right out the wood and disturb the gremlins living in there, I've then got to unscrew that to let off the middle band. And then I've got that screw and that screw, take the trigger guard off, and then I can separate it from the wood. So in here, what we've got is this very, very, very light barrel. And the trick with these old military rifles is getting a very light barrel to shoot well. I think the first to absolutely nail it properly was the US with the 1903 Springfield. And we're going to see a little bit of 1903 Springfield in the No.4 when I take it apart. But what they were trying to do here is fiddle with the vibrations so that the barrel would react the same with and without the bayonet with Mark VI ammo. And then they changed the ammo, and these shoot very, very high with the bayonet fixed with Mark VII ammo. So, bit of a waste of time ultimately, but never mind. So, it's really, really light, this barrel. So this band here attaches with spring tension, so that tries to sort of set a vibrational node up. There's a bearing surface either side of that, and then here it bears down there. It pushes up on the nose cap with the spring. Basically, the spring tends to push the nose cap like that. That pushes, clamps the top of the barrel down. So you're clamping the front end of the barrel between the top of the nose cap, and you can see where it bears there because there's a wear mark. And you can see that it's not all the way around. It's only on the top, and that clamps the barrel under spring tension there. Like that. Overly complicated, overly expensive. This is a heavy, heavy piece. So let's bring the other one round and get it open. So we've got the No.4 now, and this is easy comparatively because all we've got is 2 bands, and I should be able to get the top woodwork off without taking off the front sight. If I want to take the bands right off, I'm going to have to take the front sight protector off. We'll see if we can avoid this. Band's not hinged. Yeah! It's just a spring clip, which is already making it cheaper. You're already saving parts. Make sure that I don't mix the two up. Again, it's just a spring clip. These are just fairly simple pressed parts. So that's 2 screws. Band comes loose. Let's see if I can't generate enough play. No, we're going to have to take the. No, we're going to have to take it off. I mean, this was an armourer's job. This was not to be done by the soldier. The soldier was only supposed to take his bolt and his magazine out and clean through there. Anything more serious needed the attention of an armourer. So that pops off, and then we can, now the front sight's unprotected, take that off, take the top handguard off, and then off comes the wood. Now the first thing you'll notice here is that this barrel is massively heavier than this one. Part of the reason why you can have the extra metal in here is you don't have that massively heavy nose cap, which is a surprisingly large chunk of metal. And we haven't got this complicated nonsense system going on in here. What we've got is we've got contact at the reinforced, the Knox form here, and then the barrel is clear in its channel up to the muzzle bearing up here. And in an ideally set up rifle in military configuration, we should have 2 to 6 pounds of downforce, and it should be centered and return to center on its own at the muzzle bearing there. And this is something that they probably could have had. I mean, Here, this particular version of the rifle was 1907, but this aspect of it was settled by 1901. It was in production just after. Could you make a barrel quite that light work with this kind of system? I don't know. I don't know. But, I mean, the rifles had to fulfill the same accuracy test, basic accuracy test that all of them had to pass, which was 4 out of 5 shots into a 1 inch wide by 1.5 inch high square at 100 feet. And I believe that by within they mean totally within, but I haven't got confirmation on that. Where this really starts to show is they did a partial test at other ranges, including 600. And if I remember rightly off the top of my head, an SMLE had to put 6 or 7 shots into 24 inches at 600 yards, whereas a No.4 had to do that into 18 inches. A certain number of these were free floats. It doesn't shoot as well as a free float because this is still, in modern terms, this is still a light and whippy barrel. And in case you're saying, oh, my AR-15's got a narrower barrel than that and it shoots well as a free float. Yeah, you're right, it has a narrower barrel than that, but it also has a much smaller hole down it. So it's actually, I ran the calculations once and it's actually quite a bit stiffer. Even an A1 barrel on an AR-15 is stiffer than this, and you're shooting a less powerful cartridge down it, so it's less stressed. With wartime timber, if it starts to warp in service, it can push obliquely and cause nastiness. It was quicker and easier to set them up as free floats, less susceptible to that, but you're accepting a worse accuracy in the first place. And I believe this is mostly on Lend-Lease rifles. And because with the Lend-Lease rifles, the customer was Uncle Sam and not the British government couldn't impose its standards anymore. They got what they were given. And I should note that there's basically no interchangeability between these rifles. You'll occasionally see an SMLE buttstock modified to fit on a No.4. This was a wartime measure because they had tons of these in store, unfitted, so they modded them to fit into this butt socket, which is not quite the same internally. The magazines are not directly compatible, although again you occasionally see an SMLE magazine modified to fit on a No.4. Those were approved conversions, but basically, aside from the fact that it follows the same basic principles, it's a different rifle. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to TFP TV. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. And many, many thanks go out to our sponsors, Ventura Munitions, who help to make this kind of content possible. Bye.